Lisa here, Patriot Farm Girl with the Quantum View, and I am putting up some videos that I have had for a very long time. And I have put them up on YouTube in the past, like 3 times, but they've been deleted every time. So I want everybody needs to see these videos from Bill Brockbrader. Okay, if you haven't yet watched the series of videos that were done back in 2011, I believe, with maybe 2010, with Carrie Cassidy, Project Camelot, with Bill Wood, Beyond Looking Glass. That was what she called that series. I have them on the channel as well. I believe I have all of those videos on the channel. If I do not, I will put them up after these videos come on. But I want everybody needs to watch these videos. This is from, give it a little bit of a backstory about these videos. So if you know who Carrie Cassidy is, and you've watched the Beyond Looking Glass interview with Bill Wood, okay, that is, it's not, his name isn't actually Bill Wood, it's actually Bill Brockbrader. And anyhow, that was like an AKA kind of thing when he first did these videos with Carrie. Anyhow, go watch those because it's really important, kind of like a backstory on who this person is. Because if you don't know like kind of who he is, it just looks like some guy sitting in a tent talking to you and you don't have no idea, right? And so if you haven't watched those, actually, I would say watch those first. Go through it. There's 2, I believe. I think I broke them up to half-hour segments. Anyhow, go watch those. I'll put a link to those in the description of this video. But here's the deal. So he explains everything in this main video that this one right here. But basically he made these videos back in, I would say, circa like 2014, 2015, somewhere right around that time frame. And right after he basically disappeared himself in order to go basically give up the rest of his life, give up his life for the rest of his life to work with what I am pretty much have come to the conclusion of, with everything that I've watched and everything that I've known, you know, and I mean, I've been into learning about this stuff since 2007 and just really studying in all of the areas of what's going on right now. Okay, all the disclosure. And literally watched every single video that Carrie Cassidy has ever done with all of these super soldiers and whatnot. But he made these videos around 2014. He sent them on a flash drive to a little old lady and asked that they be released, put on YouTube or whatever, and gotten to as many people as possible. The one video, this main one, was to be released like in he asked to have them released in like October 2017. What else started in October of 2017? I think he wanted these videos to go out there so that people would kind of have an idea of what the military back channel was, and that it was really real, and that there are thousands of people that have given up their lives for the rest of their lives for us to bring this cabal down. Okay. And I think that's why he wanted them out, this particular video out around October 2017, in order for it to give people an idea of what was behind this situation. Right. And so anyhow, this little old lady didn't really know what she was doing. She couldn't even really use the computer. And so she did have some help. Not all of the videos got out there. There was a letter that went along with that. I have that somewhere that I can pull and read, but unfortunately my channel got deleted 3 times, and all of that information was on my channel. I don't know if I have that anymore. Anyway, I'll look for it though. Anyway, I will go ahead and watch this video. There's 2 other ones that I'm going to put up as well. After you watch this one, watch the Project Camelot videos with Bill Brockbrader or Bill Wood, Beyond Looking Glass, and then watch this one. And then there's 2 other ones that I'll put up as well that you'll want to watch as well. It'll give you a good overview of what's going on and what I think this Des person that has come out, what he is connected to. Okay. It's big. This is big. It's so big, it's beyond our imagination. Even those of us who have been, basically truthers, anons since, forever, for 20 years, 15 years for me, pretty much. I think our socks are going to be blown off. Anyhow, you guys. Okay, so watch this video, and then after you watch the Project Looking Glass, and then the other 2. All right, so I will say see you for now, and watch the video all the way through. You will be like, for me anyway, mouth hit the floor. I'm just like, oh my goodness. So it's really, really great. And so watch them, and then let me know what you think. I would love to talk to y'all about, like, let's throw some thoughts together, and have some discussions about this. It would be really, really great. All right. I will say see you for now. Peace out. Namaste. God bless you. And we're getting close, guys. We're getting close.
Okay, everyone. Probably noticed that I've disappeared and have been gone for a few weeks. That's okay. Things kind of worked out interesting, and now I kind of want to tell everybody about what's happening in my life, so that nobody worries, but also so everybody understands what's going on. Couple of things. This is just going to be done like video logs, so if somebody comes along and edits it and there's some continuity things, I'm doing my best, but give me a break. Also, there's some things going on in the world that everybody should kind of understand. And, I know there's been some interesting videos produced by Don Shipley and his minions about who and what I am. But that's going to be kind of one of the things that I want to address. So let's get into the important stuff. Let's see, where do I start? Well, let's start back at the beginning, about 2008. I was kind of in a weird place after the whole housing market explosion, as were a lot of people, and I was one of those people that knows quite a bit about, how the internet works and stuff like that. And so I talked with quite a few people and kind of got with this small group of people that I think everybody would call hacktivists or cyber activists or hackers or anonymous. I can explain all of that, but let's just say a group of people that, like to talk about big subjects and, sometimes get a little mischief to, get the real information that's out there. So did that, and it progressed and it progressed and it progressed, and everybody kind of knows that that's how Anonymous worked out. A bunch of these little groups get together and they all work together to do something. Anonymity is kind of huge, and so we use a piece of the internet called the dark web. And all that means is the area of the internet that search engines or applications or anything like that use. We used just what is essentially anonymous chat. And that progressed and progressed, and everybody knows 2 things about each other: their handle and their story. And everybody has a handle, everybody has a story. And my story, stood out, and people, accepted it for what it was, but really it wasn't a big deal until around end of 2010. End of 2010, there was this thing going around, this myth, this legend of this supposed NSA guy who could get us tons and tons of information. And, nobody really believed it, but it progressed where information would come out, and then something, that information would be proven correct. And it was, seemingly unbelievable to us that he could do this over and over again and not be exactly who he said he was. So he became kind of a legend. This was building up after the, during and including the Occupy movement. And, we learned a lot from the Occupy movement, especially about the intelligence world, not specifically the intelligence world, but how the intelligence world would be used to infiltrate and disinfo and just totally destroy these movements. So, it wasn't like in the 60s or 70s when people would get together and be able to, do this kind of stuff, because it would get stomped. And bear in mind, we're also very aware of the difference between the government intelligence services and private intelligence services. And, a lot of other things that the tinfoil hat wearing crazies knew about. So, where we, didn't really believe everything that we heard, we tended to be the people that went out and got the information, so we knew what was really going on in the world. Not always by legal means, but that's neither here nor there. Rounding to, mid 2011, there was more talk about this legendary, NSA guy that was willing to help. And there was, more drive to, figure out what could be done. What's he going to get us? What is so important that, we couldn't otherwise just get it ourselves? And that's when things began to shuffle out, that, we always understood that there was the elite of the world, the 1%, or of America, but, it's the world. America, Britain, they tend to be, the hot spots for the elite. But, you had the 1%ers. And then you had this smaller group of the 1%ers, the 1% of the 1%, let's say, that really controlled things. They controlled corporations. They controlled governments through those corporations. We were very, very aware that this is how the world worked. It was controlled through, a handful of people. Very, I don't know, few hundred, who knows. But there was these group that knew exactly what was going on and controlled every aspect of corporations, controlled every aspect of the government through those corporations, and more evidence that we found, fed into this truth. But never was there any way to do anything about it. Occupy got crushed, and, not a lot of people were willing to put their butts on the line to find out that, all this was just bull. It was a pipe dream. So necessarily, this got pushed around and questioned. Eventually, there was enough proof or enough evidence, and that was weighed and measured against enough of the corporate control of government that people really wanted to do something about, that we decided to take it upon ourselves to all work together to do something. And that something was a little bit unusual. See, we had a lot of information, and a lot of information about the cabal, or, the 1% of the 1%, or these, seemingly unhumanistic people that would do anything and go to any means to, have control. Be it financially, be it blackmail, what have you. Corruption, it was all out there. So we worked very, very hard to come up with a plan. And you got to understand, when you've got a bunch of little groups working together, and the people in those little groups are all anonymous to each other, there can, be a little bit of infighting and confusion. But it came down to what essentially was a vote. We would go all in to help this one guy who worked for the NSA to get us everything we needed. Now, everything we needed is a lot. It is an enormous amount of information. We need all the intelligence we can get on the corporate world, on the world of the elites, on the blackmail list. We don't really care about governments or anything like that, because they're just pawns in all this. We want the real stuff, the corporate intelligence, the private sector intelligence that would help us understand how this cabal ran their empire. So it was decided that, everybody would work together, and this NSA guy would get all the intelligence that we needed, but he needed something in return. It was basically put out that when things were busy, the first thing that went away is internal audits and internal supervision of these private sector companies. So the best way we could help is to make sure that the U.S. intelligence, government intelligence, not just U.S., world government intelligence, and private intelligence sectors were all looking out. And that was very important to the plan, because as long as they were all looking out, they didn't have any time to look in. And in is where everything really, really, really important was happening. Of course, in my little group, it was devilishly devised that I could soak up a massive amount of intelligence assets if I was to use my story. Now, it's not crazy to believe that my story, while, very true, wasn't really that big a deal. Knowing that remote-controlled cruise missiles were doing the same things that drones were doing in the 90s, that drones are doing today, it wasn't that big a deal. So, I didn't know, but, we did know that the whole fake Navy SEAL thing would play pretty well. And they would want to do a lot to discredit me. And so, I kind of dipped my toes in the water in the legal world and fought around through in Las Vegas. But really, when it came time, with a lot of help, we decided to kind of go all in. And all in is essentially what everybody knows is my interview with Carrie Cassidy. my first interview with Carrie Cassidy. Now, you know, there's a lot to understand with how that all worked out, but essentially, you know, putting my story out there got a lot of people to kind of pay attention. And the fact that people were paying attention made intelligence companies, defense, security, all those private industries, you know, have to do something about my story. And almost immediately, those assets pointed a gentleman called Don Shipley right at me. Big bullseye right on my chest. And if you understand that, you know, being completely humiliated, having the whole liar pedophile thing play out, you know, it wasn't a big deal. That's what they were going to use. And, you know, getting into this, I had a pretty good idea that I was, you know, painting a pretty huge target on my chest. Now, there is one thing that I kind of laid out in the beginning. I was like, I do not want to go to jail for this. I do not. So I told my story very, very specifically. So nothing could really come out, no violation of my confidentiality agreement, no Espionage Act, none of that would play. And so, you know, it kind of went pretty well. And while there was a huge disagreement about me getting involved with Eva Moore and her participation in it, you know, I'll talk more about that later, but it ended up being, you know, a pretty smart decision on my part. And that played out. We did some videos, I did a radio show, and there was a lot of work going on. You know, my group was just watching the intelligence world, you know, light up like a Christmas tree around me. And it was almost unbelievable, the number and amount of assets and intelligence that poured into what I was doing. And, you know, I was going head to head with, you know, some of the biggest corporations in the world. Intelligence-wise, defense contractor-wise, private security-wise, you know, everybody. This was, you know, this was playing out well, and everybody was super, super happy that so much was happening. Now, if you can remember in the 2012, early 2013 time, there was a lot of stuff going on. It wasn't just me. Anonymous, there was a whole cell that got taken down. There was just a lot of stuff. Boston bombing, you know, just tons and tons of crazy stuff going on, which necessarily played into what was happening, and that was really, really good for what we were trying to do. So, there came the day, I think it was May 2012, where, you know, I got an alert. I was told, dude, warrant for your arrest has been issued. You gotta bail. You gotta go. You gotta, you know, find someplace safe and get there. But there was an or, and that or was kind of a big deal, and it made me think. That or was that maximum you could do is 2.5 years in prison. It'd be fed, so, you know, no big deal. You'd have people watching out for you. I mean, the anonymous groups, you know, would make it worth your while. And you could draw this intelligence drain out for a really long time. But if you ran, you'd have to go silent, and you couldn't really, but a court case, that would really drag things out. And so I made the decision to stand and fight and really kind of, keep all of the intelligence efforts in private industry pointed in my direction. And throughout my court case, I mean, just the most incredible stuff was going on. I'll talk about it later, but the details aren't important. Everybody knows how it turned out. I was convicted and sentenced to pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to be, 27 to 33 months. Right down the middle, 30 months. And, I'd pretty much already done a year of that, so no big deal. And, after sentencing, I was just kind of waiting to hear what happened. Now, I knew what was going on the outside, and I knew that Don Shipley had done his video, and that I got crucified at the pre-release here, or the pre-sentence release hearing, and, I understood that's the way it was going to go. I understood before the pre-sentence release hearing that that's what was going to happen. And there's a lot of details about that, and the trial, and the sentence, and everything else that I do want to talk about, but I don't want to do that now. I want to do that separate, because what we're really talking about was the misdirection that needed to play out. And so that misdirection continued to play out until I was transferred to the detention center, federal detention center at SeaTac, which is a city between Seattle and Tacoma, right by the airport. Anyway, a month or two after I was transferred to SeaTac, I'm watching the news, and lo and behold, this guy, Edward Snowden, releases all this information about, everybody, the U.S. and Britain basically spying on everyone, reading all the emails, listening to all the phone calls, and it was a huge deal. But see, it wasn't a huge deal to everybody else like it was to me, and I'm sure everybody else that, played in my world, because that was really, really important, and it was a big deal, but really, kind of played out. It's, people found out there was no, riots in the streets, there was no anger, there was no uprising, certainly even today, the government still spies on everybody as much as they did before and doesn't even apologize for it. But nobody really saw what actually happened. Probably this might even come as a shock to the private intelligence community too. See, what everybody saw was yet another misdirection. A misdirection for Snowden to get everybody to look over here, what the right hand is doing, and the left hand is doing something just a little bit different, but it's not important as the right hand. So while Ed Snowden is telling the world about, that America spies on everybody, and that plays out, and that continues the distraction and the misdirection, the Cabal Library of Congress, everything you wanted to ever know about how corporate business was done, dirty secrets, blackmail files, millions of files, and well over a terabyte of information. And a terabyte, it's, maybe hard for people to understand, but when you're talking about documents, I mean, it's a sea, it's an ocean of information. So I know that's what's happening, and so, you know, it makes the year and a half, the time that I've got to do a CTAC, you know, I'm pretty happy. I knew what I did mattered, and it would be great to know exactly what was happening, but shortly, or right after I was told about the arrest warrant, I cut communications. I was out. I had no idea how to get a hold of anybody except for the time when I got out and I got to a place where I could come in contact with them. And there's a very specific set of requirements that were necessary for that to happen. So, everybody needs to understand that while all this was happening, Eva played a very central role in all this, because she continued to soak up those intelligence assets right up until Snowden disappeared and went to Hong Kong and released all of his information, and, you know, just happened to end up in Russia, in the one country that couldn't be coerced or manipulated or blackmailed into giving them up. So Snowden's nice and safe in Russia, but he is also cut off. He is not in communication with any of his people. And, you know, he's essentially kind of, you know, in the same boat that everybody else is, either in prison or, you know, in the Ecuadorian embassy, or, you know, hiding in internet. But nobody's really coming out anymore. Nobody's really doing anything important because they're so damn busy going through all this information and going through all these documents and kind of organizing all that information into what we now know to be a comprehensive map or information, or however, everything you ever wanted to know about how the corporations of the world were working and who they were working with and how they got people to work with them, how they made their money and how they financed and how they got people to cooperate. I mean, just everything. And it was absolutely unbelievable that this all could happen and nobody could figure it out. Well, if you know the truth, you know why. 90% of the information that is put out on the internet to the awake and aware people is garbage that they generate. Now, it may be true, but not because something is true doesn't necessarily mean it's what people need to worry about. And they were very good at using their intelligence community to keep the people that paid attention and would make a difference in the world distracted and always moving from one to another to another. Now, I will tell you this beyond a shadow of a doubt. Anybody who is putting out information on a regular basis that has never been arrested by the federal government is putting out information that may be true, but isn't necessarily that important. Otherwise, they would stop them from doing that. Several stories have come out since I've been released. Scott Bennett, one of the best examples of somebody who was putting out good information. He was talking about how he had the information that corporations, primarily U.S. corporations, were financing terrorism. I mean, that should be a big deal, but of course, you know, it doesn't ever get to the news that way. This information never gets out. People like Scott Bennett are federally indicted and charged. I can't remember the name of the guy that he found while he was in prison, but you know, this is all very pertinent and very real, apparently, in the big picture. Because if you can see in the big picture that the terrorism is being financed by U.S. corporations, then you can start to see the pieces move around. And you can see how all of this money that is being spent to the tune of $18+ trillion of U.S. debt isn't necessarily being used to combat something that the private corporations that make their money on government contracts are creating and then moving around till it gets to the terrorist world. And there's, it isn't like, Blackwater's paying out. No, it's a very sophisticated, very detailed, very hard to understand plan. But it is in fact exactly what's happening. Since the 1980s, during the Soviet-Afghan War, the U.S. has been responsible for creating terrorism ever since. And every conflict, every situation where the U.S. had to get involved ended up being something that you can easily see how the U.S. created it. Osama bin Laden worked for the CIA during the Soviet-Afghan War. He was a leader. They trained him and his people to fight the Soviets, and then gave them weapons. And that has been happening ever since. And that is just one piece of the puzzle. The puzzle is huge and incredibly difficult to understand. But to know that is happening is very key, because then you can connect the conflicts and you can see how the people that are our freedom fighters one day are the enemy rebels in the next conflict. And it just works like that. Everybody who was our friend in the past is now our enemy, and we've got to fight him and destroy him. And that plays out all the way till ISIL. It's not a coincidence that those guys are running around in American military vehicles, shooting American weapons with American ammunition at Americans, or at least the Iraqi trained Americans. And those, ISIL people happen to come from the areas that no longer had a problem. Libya, Syria, all of our used-to-be friends are now fighting us. And, when you're able to take a step back and see the whole picture, it becomes very clear that both sides, the U.S. military and the rebels, or the ISILs, or the Libyans, or the Al-Qaeda's, or, terrorists of the world, are being financed by the exact same people. And, the details change, but it works out that way. And then you take another step back and you see, how the world of finance and money creation and everything works to this big picture, where you see that corporations are using governments to turn the population of the planet into debt slaves. And when you know that that's what's happening, and you can see the whole picture, and you can know how it's happening and what's going on, you can see all that very clearly, then you can start to do something about it. And as I have been recently made aware, something started to happen a little while, I don't know 100% for sure, after Snowden was able to communicate all this information to the quote-unquote anonymous groups, or the groups of people that already knew that corporations were controlling world governments and really wanted to do something about it, and were ready to really do some pretty radical stuff, because they had already seen people like me, give up what essentially was 2.5 years of my life for something that I believed in so strongly needed to be done. So that became the trend, and many, many, many people did essentially what I did, and determined that they were going to sacrifice their lives, and not, dying, but living for something that is so important that they were willing to, live the rest of their lives in a way that basically, started doing something about this corporate-controlled world that we live in. So, a very large, apparently, very large group of people kind of disconnected themselves for security reasons from the world. Everybody has disappeared in some way, from the just walking away and, not telling your parents where you're going, to, crazy stuff like, faking their own deaths. I won't go into details about how to do that because, can use that still. But a large group of people have now completely dedicated all of their time and all of their energy to doing one thing, and that's changing the way the world works and doing something about the corporate control over the world. And it's gotten pretty damn out of control. It would surprise anyone. Certainly when I found out, it was a pretty big surprise to me. So let's talk about that real quick, because I'm sure people want to know. So it was necessary for me to put myself in a situation where contacting my old group, such as I was probably using a compromised means of communication. But it's the only one I had. So I know that it's pretty straight up that if I contact these guys, that I may be, walking into a situation where I'm just going to get my supervised release violated and I'm going back to prison. So kind of need to be ready to react very quickly. So that's what I did, and we'll talk about the craziness that precipitated all that later, and detailed explanations and all that. But basically, I got myself in a situation where if I needed to beat feet and leave the instant that I got contact, I could. And it had to be that way. It really did, because security, nobody understands it like I do. And the people that I work with know it just as well. And they have separated themselves so that security is 100%. And they don't need to worry about any of this being traced back to, a name. And they don't necessarily have family or friends that can be used against them. And that's what it is. So I put out the call, I'm here, I want to get in contact. And that was after a kind of difficult period in my life, and I'll talk more about that later. but I got a response. And the response was, exactly what I expected. Get clear. Get clear, get safe, get out of contact, get off the grid. This is a burned means of communication. And make contact through this sleeper means of communication. And, we'll just say, little old housewife in the middle of nowhere, doesn't have anything to do with anything, but, can plug me into a new means of communication. So I go, and I do that, and lo and behold, I'm walking into something that I did not expect. I was eventually met and brought in and debriefed and advised and educated about everything that had happened since I was cut off from communications. And I still am, utterly amazed at how all this worked, and that it worked, and that this has turned into something beyond imagination. There is something out there so big and so secret that nobody knows about it, and it has been working to change the way the world works. It is disrupting corporate control over humanity through governments. And it is a pretty slick operation, I'm just going to say. So I don't really know how it all started, so I'm just going to give everybody kind of like a hypothetical, how I see it in my head example of the way it kind of began. So people got together, people started disconnecting from society and information and banding together, protecting each other, and then one day, they say, okay, well, what do we need first? Well, first thing we need our own private intelligence company. We need to, infiltrate. So we'll look through all these files. Now, there's Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown is perfect. He is mid-level, somewhere between elite and cabal. Certainly well off and well connected and well protected and knows everything, but isn't necessarily the deep, dark psychos that the cabal are. And so we look at his file, and he's quite well compromised. He would go to jail for the rest of his life if this information ever made it to a U.S. attorney that dared to indict him. So a couple guys go to Mr. Brown's office and say, Mr. Brown, hello, what can I do for you? We want you to look at this. And they hand Mr. Brown the file, and Mr. Brown, goes pale and starts cold sweats and goes, how did you get this? Doesn't matter how we got it, Mr. Brown. It only matters that we have it. And so Mr. Brown says, okay, well, what do you want? Do you want money? What do you want? Because this is obviously blackmail. Oh, no, Mr. Brown, we're not asking for anything like that. We only want you to create a private intelligence company. I don't understand. We want you to create a company whose business is private intelligence. And you're going to do that. Well, okay, I don't understand. How's it all going to work? So, we go through the details until we get to how it's going to be funded. And we drop a number on him, and he's like, there is no way I have that kind of money. I can't, there's no way. Even if I wanted to. I'm leveraged out. Everybody is. There's no way I could give you that kind of money. And so Mr. Brown gets handed another piece of paper. He says, "Do you know these gentlemen?" "Well, yes." "But they would never help you." And Mr. Brown is informed that that's exactly what they told us about him. And so Mr. Brown is now very aware that those people will fund the company. Now, Mr. Brown has created a private intelligence company that is well funded and has a very competent staff that has an enormous amount of experience on how to run private intelligence. And this operation begins to run. Now, what you need to understand about the private intelligence sector is that they aren't necessarily dealing with, CIA knock lists and world secrets and, really important shit. They're more interested in spying on each other. The elites, and knowing everything that's happening, knowing everything in corporations that are happening, knowing secrets, knowing ahead of time, everything. They want to be informed, which is necessarily why this NSA listens to everybody's phone calls, reads everybody's emails, information is important. So now we're plugged into this world through this, confirmed, good guy elite. And we're gaining intelligence all over the place. And everything's working, and details aren't important, but, it's clicking along. Now, at this point, people are probably going, okay, this is great. And, I really, really, really want to believe this. But, you could just be making all this shit up. You are the pedophile liar, by the way. So, we don't need to necessarily listen to what you have to say. Okay, and I accept that. And I was kind of doing the exact same thing when I was being told what was going on and why I would be doing everything that I'm going to be doing next. So what if there was some proof that this was happening? What if there was some undeniable evidence in the world that proved that all this was happening? That'd be big. So let's get into that. Year and a half right after all this happened, maybe less than a year, I don't know. I think everybody remembers that there was this rash of corporate suicides and deaths. A lot of people were seemingly committing suicide. And, this raised an uproar in the Awake and Aware crowd because nobody believed it was suicides. Well, I'm here to tell you that for the most part, just people killing themselves. Back during the recruitment phase of this operation, it was a little bit rough around the edges. And the people that were doubling all of these elite people and getting them to work for or with us instead of the old ways were seeing themselves between a rock and a hard place, and instead of waiting for somebody to knock them off, they committed suicide. I'm going to tell you right now, most people in the elite world, the 1%ers, have some skeletons in their closets that would shock and terrify damn near everybody in the world. And that is significant because what you have to understand is that when there was a big mass arrest thing right before I got arrested. And the mass arrests, and we're going to arrest everybody that's done something wrong. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that if we cleaned out every prison in the world, it would not be enough room put the people who deserved life in prison away. We are talking millions of people that have, mostly around finance, but, there's some other stuff, sexual stuff, that would really upset people. And that is what is being used against them to control them and gain their cooperation to do all of the things that they do. So what you're looking at is, in a world, well, you've got to know spycraft. An agent or an asset that is being blackmailed into doing something is very, very susceptible to being flipped and used as a double agent if they're given an opportunity to redeem themselves morally. And that's what's happening. And it's happened on an epic scale. A huge number of people that are considered elite and, trusted by the cabal that have been doing their bidding for years, if not decades, are now hearing about this new thing that's out there, and they're going for it, and they're digging it. And it's gotten to the point where a massive operation that I can tell you about has occurred and is working. And that is oil. Now, oil was chosen mostly because it's a big deal, because it's holding back an important piece of information, which is we don't need fossil fuels. We should have been fossil fuel free a decade ago. Probably more. But because it's a non-renewable resource and it can be used to keep the debt slaves working for nothing, that it's a big deal. And plus, without fossil fuels, we got a cleaner environment. Financially, it's part of the economy. It's a big step. So being able to get control of the fossil fuels industry and systematically tear it apart from the inside would be a great first step. So I need to kind of take some time to educate you first on how money works, how commodities work, and the difference between different types of oil. So the first thing you need to understand is finance. Now, in the world of finance, it's an interesting thing, because everybody knows if you have this much asset, you can borrow this much money. And if you increase your assets, you can increase your borrowing. That makes sense. Most people are aware of fractional reserve lending that the banks use, which enables them to leverage 10 times the assets that they have, or they can loan 10 times as much money as they actually have in reserve. And that's essential because we're talking the big banks are really, responsible for $90, $100 a barrel oil. What they have done is used borrowed money to drive the price of oil up. And the way that you do that is a little complicated, but I think I can, bring it down to basics. You can make money on commodities two ways. You can buy a commodity, and when the price goes up, you can sell it and make money. But there's also this other way of buying a future. Something, oil that hasn't even been pulled out of the ground yet. And leverage, and you can buy futures with borrowed money. Can't necessarily do it with commodities. And by using these futures, what you're doing is you're betting that the price of oil is going to go up. So what you do is you use some very wonderful economic formulas made by Nobel Prize winning mathematicians that tell you, if I want oil to go up this much, I need this much oil, I need this much action in oil, I need this many people or this much money spent. And by knowing that, you know how to bet. You know how high oil is going to go because you know how much money you're going to spend, or your group is going to spend, or you're going to get people to spend to make that oil go up. So the first thing you do is you bet the oil is going to go up to this number. Once you do that, you've got all this leveraged money that is now betting that oil is going to go up to this price. And if it goes up from this price, you can buy it from the price that it is now and sell it for the price that it will be once you make your bet. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially. Then you take your real money and you buy a bunch of oil. Well, buying oil drives up the price of oil. So you buy oil until you make your bet, and then you go collect. Now, with your borrowed money, you're getting back real money or hard assets. Then you can again turn around and use as leverage to do this over and over and over and over again to drive the price up. And that's significant because once you understand that, you realize that nothing is propping up the price of oil except for leverage money or debt money or money that doesn't really exist, that never really existed. It was all borrowed. And all the money that you put up initially to drive the price up is gone. You've put it away. You've taken it out. And so knowing that oil is at $90, $100 a barrel because somebody leveraged their way up to that is significant. And it's also significant to know why. Oil, to maximize profits, needs to be as high as possible. But there's different types of oil, and this is another thing that we need to talk about. The Middle East, Russia, pretty much most people, most areas of the world have oil that is easy to get out of the ground. It's in one big pond of oil under the earth, and they can just suck as much out as they want. That oil, you can make money if oil sells for $30 a barrel. Then you have this other type of oil, and it's called shale oil. And the reason it's called shale oil is because you have to do something more to get it out of the ground. Everybody knows what that is, but they don't necessarily connect the two dots. It's fracking. You've got to go and you've got to drill a hole and then turn the bit sideways and drill it way far sideways and then pressurize that hole and fracture the shale that is holding all these little deposits of oil and natural gas and, then pump it out. And that oil costs about twice as much. You need to make about $60 a barrel to make that profitable. So the only way fracking was ever going to be worth the money and effort was if oil was well above $60 a barrel. And so that's what happened. And all these fracking companies went berserk. the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Canada, even into Pennsylvania, but they're having a tough time over there, have been going nuts. They've been fracking everywhere, cracking this shale plate and getting the oil out as fast as they can. And that has significantly changed the market, because most of the countries that have this easy access to oil, this $30 a barrel oil, are running out. Like less than 20% of what they originally had is what's left. And they know that once they run out, the shale oil US people, they're going to drive the price up to $200 a barrel, and they're going to bankrupt every other government economy in the world. They can take over just like that. So that is an incentive for other countries and other countries, let's just say countries, to work with somebody who will do something about that. Now, when oil in the past couple of months went from $100 a barrel to about 50, somewhere, it went up and down a little bit, but basically in half. Nobody knew why. Everybody was happy, but nobody knew why. And when you turn on the financial channels to figure out why, there's no good explanation. Nobody can tell you why oil is all of a sudden half of what it used to be. And that's very, very interesting, because economic principles tell you straightforward, if you want to, if the price of oil goes in half, only two things could cause that. The doubling of supply, which we know there isn't twice as much oil as there was 3 months ago out there. We know that. It's given. We also know that supply, or the demand for oil, didn't get cut in half. We are certainly using just as much oil, more or less, as we were 3 months ago. So there is no reason that anybody can tell anybody why oil is cut in half. Except there is this other, even more improbable reason for oil becoming half. That is, the people that trade in oil, about half of them walked away and don't trade in oil anymore. Because really, that demand, that pressure, that money, that leveraged income, or that leveraged money, was what was propping up the price of oil. So the only way it could happen, realistically, is if half the people that were making an enormous amount of money in oil stopped overnight. But that's what happened. And the financiers and the banks and the cabal and everybody knows it. They know who got out. They know when everybody got out. But they can't tell if a person got out because they were seduced into getting out, or if they got out because it was a good economic decision. Now, certainly not everybody that got out because we ran a great operation. Some got out because it was a good financial decision to get out, and they wouldn't lose any more money. But using those same economic formulas to know why the price, what you got to do to make the price of oil go up, you can use to make the price of oil go down. And so we used the information that we had on a lot of people and gave them pretty much the option to do something good for the world. And when all this bad stuff comes out, all this good stuff that they did since will cut them out with it, and hopefully it'll work for them, because they know very well that they can't put everybody in jail, so we're just going to, work with people and try to do the right thing at the end, as I have done. I've done some horrible things, and I don't even begin to help people understand how badly I feel about these things. But certainly, I think it's worth saying that I would do 2.5 years in federal prison to somehow pay for the things that I've done in my life, and I did. And, I would be willing to do even more than that. And that's going to be significant in the continuing conversation. Now, realize that this is going to cause an issue. Because while oil is going down, the big banks and the big industries and all the big money that trade in oil, when they have oil that they bought at $100 a barrel, and all of a sudden it's going down to $50 a barrel, they have a problem, because now that they're leveraged money, their assets aren't worth as much, so they're not allowed to borrow as much. And so they need to put in real world cash to cover the difference between $100 and $50. And they can't. So they have to sell oil to generate that cash. Well, that could cause a meltdown. And a meltdown is really good for the cabal. That's what they want. They want chaos so they can get away scot-free, and nobody would ever know the difference. Well, we don't want that to happen. So we have to, at some point, step in and control the price of oil so it doesn't free fall. So when these big guys are forced to sell their oil, well, there's another company that is more than happy to step in and buy it. And that levels everything off, and then the price goes up, price goes down, couple of bucks, and we can use that control of the oil that now this other company that, is owned by another elite or a bunch of elites or whatever is balancing the price of oil right at about $50 a barrel. Now, $50 a barrel may not seem like a big deal to everybody, but knowing that $50 a barrel is important, because shale oil companies can't survive when they're paying $10 a barrel to get rid of their product. But the guys who can get it out of the ground in the Middle East and Russia are still making $20 a barrel. Now, they're not ecstatic about that, but they understand that they're running out of oil. And unless somebody does something about the oil industry, they're screwed. They're buying oil for $200 a barrel. If they do it our way, energy resources become plentiful and abundant and damn near free. And in the long run, that ain't such a bad deal for these other countries, because once they run out of oil, they don't have a plan. Well, there's plenty of technology, and has been for some time, to replace fossil fuels with other abundant energy sources. And these other abundant energy sources range from things that are easy to tell. Lockheed Martin has, fusion in a semi-container trailer. And hopefully the people that are editing this are posting that link so you can just click on it and it'll be easy right now. To technology that would, for all intents and purposes, seem otherworldly. I'll just leave it at that. You guys can answer that question how you want to. I'll talk about that more later, but that's not the point. So realistically, most other countries, the BRICS, Middle East, they've accepted that fossil fuels are going away. They're going to help. They're going to do their part. They're going to make a lot less money for what they have left to make the transition, so they don't have to get in the situation where they're buying oil from America at $200 a barrel. We sustain the $50 a barrel mark because we don't want to collapse the energy market, but also we kind of want to profit a little bit from it because we can use those profits to finance energy research and come up with these new technologies that we don't know exist, or support these other technologies by Lockheed Martin that Lockheed Martin says are 10 years away, but if we dump a bunch of money into it, maybe they can do it in a year or 2 years. Who knows? But we do have to flip fossil fuels. Now, fracking, we all know, is the worst for the environment. So while we're getting rid of fossil fuels, we're also cleaning up the earth, we're cleaning up the environment. So much good comes from this one move that it makes sense that it's the first move. And no matter what happens with, oil and money and how much it costs and how it plays out, little shale oil companies are dying every day. They go out of business. They're bought up by the bigger shale oil companies. And those bigger companies, the longer we can sustain at $50 a barrel, the more companies will collapse because they don't have the liquidity or the real cash to keep going. And once a significant portion of fracking is collapsed, and they start to figure out, they have figured out what's going on. They're very aware of what's going on. I wouldn't be talking about this if it was a big secret. It's not a big secret. So they know that investment in shale oil is pretty much a bad investment at this point. So they're making their move, and we're making our move. And we're going to do something else next, and that's coming. And I'm going to be part of that, and I'm pretty excited. But what everybody needs to understand and necessarily needs to know is, if you remember my first video, you need to really pay attention to that first video, those first 3 videos actually, about some of the things that I said. Because I made a very concrete statement in that this was a chess game. And in this chess game, the opponent and the person playing with the opponent could both see that this game was over. Everybody knew that checkmate was going to happen, and the opponent was going to lose. And the opponent knows this, the player knows this, and I said that. And I also said that most people can't really see that it's done. The game's over, and it's just a matter of time. And the opponent is playing it out and milking it and making it take as much time and be as hard as possible. But hopefully this information that I've given you gives you a better understanding that this thing that I was just ranting and raving about, that I couldn't possibly know anything about, hopefully people can see that this is happening, and it's real, and it's going to continue to change and escalate. And the end game is that the corporate control over government is cleansed. The power of government is given back to the people. Corporations work in the best interest of their employees and their consumers, and that governments focus more about taking care of their population that they govern instead of supporting the corporations that influence them. You'll start to see lobbying die down. You'll start to see representatives in government working for the best interest of their constituents instead of doing everything seemingly outside the best interest of their constituents. But the thing to know is that as this happens, the everyday person, the guy on the street that, just 9 to 5er, doesn't really care, doesn't spend a lot of time on the internet, not a tinfoil hat wearing kind of guy, this all happens very matter of fact. And it's smooth. And nobody really knows why or how it happened. That's the goal. Why? It's very easy. Before Edward Snowden came out, only the tinfoil hat wearing crowd were very sure the government read all their communications. You had to be crazy to think this. Until Snowden came out, and then overnight, everybody accepted that the government read all your communications. So from one day to the next, we went from the tinfoil hat wearing crazies believing something to everybody believing in something. And the only reason that transition happened the way it did was because the tinfoil hat crazies kind of got the 9 to 5er normal people aware of the idea. Now, they didn't necessarily believe it or support it, but they understood that the crazies believed it. So when we came from a world where the crazies believed in something to everybody believes in something, pretty painless and accepted, and there wasn't a lot of upheaval, and it wasn't really hard, and there wasn't rioting in the streets, and now it's just, you ask the average person, does the government read your email? Yeah. And they listen to my phone calls, they can use my phone to track me, it's not that big a deal. In my first interview, I think it was in my third video, I tried to talk about this, and it was told back to me, yeah, everybody knows that, but it's not important. Does everybody understand now why it was so important that I bring that up? Realize that what I'm bringing up now is so the tinfoil hat wearing crazies or the awake and aware people can get the rest of society jabbering on about how things are happening, and that there's this movement, there's this secret organization of no-name people that are doing some real good in the world, and are gonna kind of take control over corporations and then hand that control over to the people or the employees of that. And what's going to come of it? That's an interesting subject, because depending on how far into the future you look, it gets more and more unreal for the ordinary person, but more and more interesting for the awake and aware crowd. And you can see where this is going. You can see that after we get control of oil, we can get control of finance, and after we get control of finance, we can get control of government, and after we get control of government, we can get control of some pretty amazing stuff that we don't really believe in right now. It's crazy. But there's reasons why I'm telling everybody about this, and that is to get everybody seeing what's happening. Because I guarantee even the awake and aware crowd is having trouble seeing this gas oil thing clearly. And only, the masters of the control of the private intelligence services are really aware of what's going on. Now, do they know why it's happening? No, they're still guessing, because the people that are doing this are sacrificing more than anybody could possibly imagine, even for them. And this is why this is important for me, because, I'm about to take this step. And for most people, they just go away quietly. They disappear. Their families don't know what happened to them, or, they figure out a way to make everybody believe they're dead, and they just go away. And these people are working for humanity for the rest of their lives. This is everybody that's signed up on this is pretty much aware that they're never really going to be able to stop. Because even when it's all said and done, there's going to be people out there that are pissed. I think his name was Anthony Russo. He did the Trading Places movie with Eddie Murphy. Said the best way to hurt rich people is to make them poor. And that's kind of the plan, is most everybody's going to get punished by having everybody know all the bad stuff that they've done, and we're going to, pin that up against the good stuff that they've done. But the way money works is everybody's going to be much, much more equal. And as a matter of fact, money is going to change dramatically. Money will only be for people that want something. Everybody's needs, they're done. Housing, transportation, food, energy, heat, light, whatever. Anything that you need to live, you can live comfortably. You don't have to work. Work is for people who want other things. You want a PlayStation. That's something you have to work for. You want a Ferrari. That's something you have to work for. But the desire to get things that you have to work for is almost going to go away. So that only a handful, I don't want to say handful, a percentage, and so I'm not even going to estimate it, of people that want things will go to work for them, but work won't be like 40, 80-hour work thing. It'll be like part-time job. Because everything you need is taken care of. That's where this is going. That's where this is going to end. And it will be because people, a large number of people, sacrificed living their lives in a way that made that possible. And more people are going to do it as we move into the future. And maybe there will be a day where I can come out and exist and you not be wanted for a parole violation or, confidentiality agreement violation or espionage act or, maybe. But it's a long time in the future and the world's going to be a way different place. And maybe when that time in the future comes to reconnect, it's hard to say, but, dad's not dead, brother's not dead, sister's not dead, people are popping out of the woodwork after decades. That may be hard to do. And most people are just accepting of the fact that it's very possible that we're going to live the rest of our lives as not who we are right now. And that's, something difficult to comprehend or understand or fathom right now for most people. And it's something that I'm working through right now. Is the fact is that when you're listening to this video, Bill Brockbrader, he doesn't exist. He's gone. Done. I am now a ghost. I am a shadow that is simply a no-name entity committed to working for a new humanity. And I'm doing something that a lot of other people have done. And a lot more are going to continue to do. And that is the sacrifice that's being made so that the world can transition from what it is now, debt slaves, to a humanity that we can imagine, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. And that's where we want to get to. Now, I'm going to do other pieces of other videos, and I've been talking for an hour and a half, so I'm going to take a break. But I'm going to talk about other things that kind of go beyond what I'm talking about right now. And, you know, there's reasons for that, mostly because the normal people need to be able to say, that guy's crazy, and I'm not going to listen to him. They're going to hear what I say, they're going to pay attention, believing in it, and they need to not believe right now. It needs to be something that, you know, is in the back of their mind until the proof comes. And then when the proof comes, it'll be easy for them to flip the page and accept. Government listens to all of my conversations from government. There's no way government would do that overnight. So we're going to get into some pretty radical things. They're very real. And I'm also going to talk about my court and what happened and some of the details that Don Shipley maybe didn't talk to you about in his videos to turn me into the lying pedophile that most people believe that I am. And so I'm going to take a break, and we'll do this some more moving forward and continue on.